Nothing testifies to the cultural significance of a film quite like honoring it with a bad remake. Released in 1984, Red Dawn is the story of a small band of teenage guerrillas, the Wolverines, fighting against an invading Soviet army. While the specific scenario of a land invasion of North America by Russian troops and their Latin American proxies was a bit far-fetched, the possibility of war with the Soviet Union was not. Red Dawn is merely one of the most iconic and enduring examples of that common thread. The remake was shot in '09 but not released until 2012 for reasons aplenty. In both films, the Wolverines are led by Jed, whose big brother role for the group is made explicit by the presence of Matt, his actual younger brother. In the 1984 film, Jed, played by Patrick Swayze, is barely out of high school himself. Jed is not very far removed from the rest of the group. This sameness is part of the group identity. These are young men fighting to defend their homes. With their living off the land and fighting the enemy with hunting rifles, they invoke not only America's frontier experience, but also the American combat experience in Vietnam, where a poorly equipped guerrilla force couldn't be decisively defeated precisely because they lacked the centralized material infrastructure of their industrialized opponents, and the local population supported them. In the 2012 film, which I'll just call Dead Wrong for clarity, Jed is now played by a pre-Thor Chris Hemsworth and has been reimagined as a Marine home on leave. More than any other single change, this change destroys the core of Red Dawn's story. Where in the original, Jed was just as scared and confused as the rest of the group and had to fake it because they looked to him as a leader, in the 2012 remake, Jed is now seen as reverting to his training. It's shown most clearly in the montage where Proto-Thor trains them in ambush tactics, marksmanship, and basic combat medic skills. He's no longer one of them. He's become their military advisor. This change removes the initiative from the group and places it on Jed, the Marine, the agent of the state. Whereas the guerrillas in the one true Red Dawn are seen as having the ability to resist within themselves, in the remake, it is framed as a set of skills that they can only learn from a state-sanctioned professional. The original celebrated American self-reliance and initiative. The remake celebrates deference to experts and looking to the state for assistance. This tack toward militarization and authoritarianism is not limited to Jed. Jed's father, a minor character who in the original we see broken by his time in a Soviet labor camp before being executed, is in the remake reimagined as a police officer, again an agent of the state. It continues with the transformation of Lieutenant Colonel Tanner, in the original a fighter pilot who gets shot down.
It was 5-1. I got 4.
And is then integrated into the Wolverines, is in the remake replaced with Sergeant Major Tanner, the leader of a group of Marines that use the Wolverines to achieve their own mission objective. In '84, the Wolverines help Tanner. In 2012, Tanner uses them as a force multiplier. The initiative has been flipped. If the original Red Dawn is seen as a romantic and reactionary ode to America's frontier past, the remake presents us with representatives of the American state as the only route to success and survival. It becomes a fight for one authority over another rather than a fight of freedom versus tyranny. This shift in perspective from a frontier mentality into a statist view is evident in other places as well. An iconic scene revolves around Robert, one of the young resistance fighters, drinking the blood of the first deer he kills on a hunt. The act is presented through the experienced hunters Jed and Matt as an almost spiritual act of respect passed to them by their father. It echoes not only popularized ideas of American Indians honoring the spirit of the animal, but more generally it serves as a link to the past and a way of conveying some sense of meaning beyond the immediate and material. Dead Wrong has the brothers trick Robert into drinking the blood only to laugh at him, transforming the original act of tradition, even spirituality of a sort, into a hazing prank. The scene is an iconic moment in the original and therefore had to be included in some form in order to maintain the sense of the two films telling essentially the same story. but presenting the scene in its original form would almost certainly strike much of today's audience as hokey. We can laugh at it as a joke, but we can't take it seriously as a ritualized act of respect for something that had to die so that something else could live. In the original, the only female Wolverines, Tony and Erica, make their first appearance roughly a third of the way in, well after the story has gotten underway. It is implied that they at first take on domestic duties.
Why don't you make yourself useful?
You wash it. You're never doing your washing again. Me and her is as good as any of you.
Until their first run-in with Russian soldiers. From then on, they are fully integrated members of the group, demonstrating as much heroism and contributing as much to the fight as any of the others. It's a bit surprising then that the remake portrays Tony as an over-sexualized romantic interest for Jed from the start, and has Erica mostly serving as a cause of repeated bad decision-making on the part of Matt for most of the film. While the original film managed to portray Tony and Erica as having some depth as women as well as fighters, for example, through Erica's romantic interest in Lieutenant Colonel Tanner and Tony's subdued flirting with Jed, the remake has a hard time meshing the two aspects. It falls back on the final girl trope in the sense that it explicitly separates female sexuality from traditionally masculine roles like killing bad guys.
I miss girls. Nah, not like you. I mean, like hot, sexy, voluptuous girls.
Nice.
Girls without AKs.
By the end of the film, the two women are reduced to being basically decorative, which is unfortunate since the original Red Dawn's Tony and Erica were both feminine and badass. And now we have to talk about the what the hell elephant in the room.
North Korea? It doesn't make any sense.
It started reasonably enough. Chi-Coms are the new Ruskies. So they made a movie about the People's Liberation Army coming to liberate people over here. Thanks to tax incentives for film production, they turned Michigan cities like Detroit and Pontiac into bleak authoritarian caricatures a decade before the wretched Whitmer did it. But with the movie shot and edited, some suit over at MGM seems to have realized that unlike the Soviet Union, communist China is a huge market for American movies. Oh no, we just made a movie vilifying an oppressive, murderous regime. I hope they don't blacklist us from their theaters. But with enough money and hubris, you can fix anything in post. After an odyssey involving a lot of CGI, a studio bankruptcy, and dubbing the Chinese dialogue over in Korean,
우리가 작은 새끼들이 다 오늘 죽일 겁니다.
the villains had transformed from China's PLA into Norks, a feat accomplished by digitally replacing every Chinese flag, military insignia, and signage in North Korean equivalents. In 1984, they cast our Cold War rival as the unambiguous villain. In 2012, while our military-industrial complex pointed to China as a threat in order to justify increased spending, studio execs were too worried about offending them and quashed their own finished film for 3 years while they shoehorned in Kim Jong's illest crew as the baddies, apparently thinking that none of the Chinese moviegoers they were so desperately courting would notice that these Koreans wore Chinese uniforms. No one is claiming that Red Dawn is high art or a work of literature to rival War and Peace, but it was honest, unashamedly true to itself, and entertaining. The remake was cynical, and despite having some good moments, didn't seem to understand itself, let alone the appeal of its namesake. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Dr. Francis Fukuyama, in a statement that has aged like a bucket of fish, proclaimed the end of history with the triumph of the Western liberal order. But maybe a better case can be made that we've reached the end of stories in Western liberal culture. So much of what we churn out is remakes and franchise reboots, badly retelling our own myths like illiterate children left to fend for ourselves in a forest. It feels like we lost something along the way, and fixing it in post is going to be stupid expensive. I actually briefly lived in a crappy apartment right there.